8 Terrible Rulers. Hey guys, Culture here. Today we're going to look at 8 terrible rulers. More specifically, we'll look at the atrocities they committed and how they met their end. When looking at how awful some of these people are, it really puts in perspective just how good we've got it now. You know, actually, now I think about it, that line will probably look pretty bad in a couple years' time when Trump and Putin start World War III. Let's distract ourselves from the impending nuclear war with this list of 8 terrible rulers. Number 1. Pope John XII sat as both head of the Catholic Church and Emperor of Rome in the mid-10th century. We like to imagine popes as divine vessels for God's will, when, in actual fact, they're constantly battling against their dirty human urges. Pope John XII chose not to fight his urges at all, instead submitting to them wholeheartedly and beginning one of the most blasphemous reigns in Pope history. He ascended to the position of Supreme Pontiff at the tender age of 18 and immediately began sowing his debauchery throughout holy sites. He slept with men and women who visited the papal palace, even if that meant he had to do so against their will. He also defiled the tombs of St. Peter and St. Paul with his scandalous rendezvous. But he wasn't just a dirtbag when it came to sexual encounters. He often fancied violent acts against those who questioned his way of doing things, like when he castrated one of his cardinals. His immaturity also led to some ill-advised decisions, like making a 10-year-old a bishop or conceding his position as Emperor of Rome to the leader of the Germans, Otto I, and then immediately double-crossing him. This latter act brought the anger of the Germans down upon him, but he didn't survive to see their fury. Instead, he was bashed over the head by the husband of a woman he was sleeping with and died shortly thereafter. Number 2. Rana Valona I, known more simply as Ramivo, was the Queen of Madagascar from 1828 to 1861 and holds the distinguished title of the most murderous woman in history. And she didn't just murder people, she had awful ways of torturing them too. Heaven forbid you are a Christian foreigner when Ramivo came to power in 1828 and decreed that no foreign religion was to be spread to her people. 15 Christian leaders were hung by their neck above a ravine and cut one by one, plummeting to their doom. The 3 B's of torture, boiling, burning, and burying alive, were also go-to punishments for the cruel queen. Foreign soldiers were also prime targets for her anger, with the heads of French soldiers being impaled on the beaches of Madagascar to warn off future invaders. Given Ramivo's treatment of foreigners, it's no wonder her European contemporaries thought her methods were extreme. But to be fair, her isolationist mindset came from a good place. She wanted to maintain her country's culture and become self-sufficient. It's just that her methods for achieving this were less than ideal. She would make people undergo a test of trust called tangina, in which the victim would swallow 3 pieces of chicken skin, followed by a poisonous nut that made them vomit. If all 3 pieces weren't regurgitated, the victim was killed. She once sent 50,000 of her people on a buffalo hunt and ordered them to build over whatever obstacles they encountered. The 4-month-long hunt yielded no buffalo and lost 10,000 people. Politically, however, she was a force to be reckoned with. Ramivo fought off numerous assassination attempts and foiled a series of coups orchestrated by her own son, Rakoto. It wasn't until she eventually died of natural causes in 1861 that Rakoto was finally able to take the throne under the name Radama II. Number 3. King Leopold II was the King of the Belgians from 1865 to 1909, in which time he began a private enterprise known as the Congo Free State. This project, which had philanthropic intentions when first supported by the colonial nations of Europe, quickly became one of the most horrific, evil exploitations of people in human history. Leopold essentially turned the modern-day country of the Democratic Republic of the Congo into his personal workforce, milking the Congo's abundance of natural resources to generate trade and turn a profit. He then used this profit to fund his own construction projects in Belgium, creating a physical legacy. With the help of explorers Henry Stanley and David Livingstone, and Arab slave trader Tipu Tip, Leopold subjugated the 20 million-odd Congolese inhabitants and put them to work mining gold, hunting elephants for their ivory, and cultivating rubber plantations. And all of this without ever setting foot in the Congo. His hold on the Congo was firm and unjust. Those who rebelled were killed, and workers who failed to meet their quotas had their wives and children mutilated, commonly cutting off their hands or feet. In a civil war that truly raises the point of the lesser of two evils, Leopold was forced to cut ties with Tipu Tip when the European public rallied against the slave trade. Tip raised an army of slave traders, and Leopold commissioned an army of Congolese mercenaries, bloodying the Congo even further. When news of the horrors in the Congo Free State finally reached the outside world, Leopold was forced to cede his land to the Belgian government. By this time, an estimated 50% of the Congolese population had died from war, overwork, torture, and disease. Number 4. Mary Stewart, more commonly known as Mary, Queen of Scots, ruled from 1542 to 1567. In this period, she had 3 marriages, all of which pulled her further down an abyss towards her eventual imprisonment and execution. But unlike the other rulers on this list, Mary's failure as a leader wasn't due to violence. She just kinda sucked at politics. Mary ascended to the throne at just 6 days old, and her entire reign as queen was plagued with political snafus. It would be fair to say that Mary's life was not a happy one. She spent most of her time fighting against the circumstances she had been born into, failing to quell uprisings by the Scottish nobles, and fending off attacks from suspicious rivals, like the Queen of England Elizabeth I. Her second husband, Lord Darnley, conspired with nobles to kill Mary and her unborn son by shocking her into having a miscarriage. Mary eventually turned Darnley to her side, but not before angering the nobles, who then killed Darnley in retaliation. Mary was forced by circumstances to marry one of the co-conspirators, the Earl of Bothwell, to earn the nobles' favour. Of course, the nobles still weren't happy and rebelled even more openly, blaming the death of Darnley on Mary herself and imprisoning her. Mary was forced to abdicate the throne to her 1-year-old son, James VI. You may be wondering in all this when Mary did any actual ruling. The answer is she didn't really. She just went around trying to be a martyr for everyone else's misdeeds and getting more and more people angry at her. When she escaped imprisonment again, she made the stupidest political move yet. She fled south, thinking her cousin Elizabeth I would help her. She did not. In fact, Elizabeth had been orchestrating the drama in Scotland the whole time to keep Mary busy and keep her mind off claiming Elizabeth's own throne. With Mary in her domain, Elizabeth jailed her for 18 years before giving her a bogus trial and sentencing her to be beheaded. Thus ended the life of Mary, Queen of Scots. Number 5. Idi Amin Dada was the president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979, in which time he earned the title Butcher of Uganda. No offense to all the butchers out there, but butcher isn't exactly the title you want as leader of a country. Amin began his political career in the King's African Rifles, or KAR, a regiment of the British colonial army. During this time as a soldier, he was constantly at risk of being cashiered for his use of excessive violence in interrogations. Naturally, he was promoted to the position of Effendi, the highest rank available to a black African soldier. This violent past served him well when Uganda gained independence in 1962, and an ally of his, Milton Obote, became Uganda's first prime minister. Obote later elevated himself to the position of president in his lust for power, as his relationship with Amin turned toxic. Amin staged a coup while Obote was overseas and took the presidency from him in 1971. But perhaps I should refer to Amin by his official title. His Excellency President for Life, Field Marshal Alhaji Dr. Idi Amin, VCDSO MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular. Humble. Amin then created security forces to butcher every Ugandan civilian whom he thought might be allied with Obote, thus securing his post. This included an archbishop, the governor of the Bank of Uganda, and the chief justice. Amin's next move was to exile a huge number of Asian business owners who controlled a majority of the economic dealings in Uganda, his aim being to reinstate his own supporters in their place. He then cut ties with Israel, opting instead for an alliance with Colonel Gaddafi and the Soviet Union. As Amin's leadership wore on, he became more paranoid, suffering from hypomania, and Ugandan nationalists eventually rebelled against him, forcing him into exile. He lived out the remainder of his days in Libya, then Saudi Arabia, where he died in 2003. His 8 years in office led to the deaths of around 300,000 Ugandan citizens and collapsed the Ugandan economy. Number 6. King John of England ruled from 1166 to 1216, an impressive duration, but these 50 years saw some of the most incompetent, self-serving and cowardly acts in British history. John was treacherous, lecherous, and nothing else rhymes with those two words. But you get my point. He was a traitor to the throne before he ascended to it, and used his power to sleep with the wives and daughters of nobles, drawing their ire. His methods of punishment were also sadistic, condemning people to death by hunger on more than one occasion. Perhaps worst of all, he was terrible at politics. His critics called him soft sword, for he would wage wars, then immediately shy away from conflict at the first opportunity. In the most famous instance of this, John sent his armies to reclaim the western half of France, which he had lost earlier in his reign to Philip Augustus. To fund the expedition, John raised taxes to an inordinate amount and spent all the money in the treasury. The French repelled his forces, defeating him decisively and bringing even further shame upon his name. One good thing came out of this though. John's subjects rebelled and insisted upon reforms in the duties of the king. This led to a begrudging John signing the Magna Carta, a document which most importantly stated that a free man cannot be imprisoned, etc., by the king's will alone. John eventually died of dysentery while on a campaign, leaving his far more able son Henry III on the throne. Number 7. Gaius Caligula was the emperor of Rome for just 4 years, from 37 to 41 AD. The insanity of his rulings and actions while in power would truly have been something to behold. He was so shameful that the Romans attempted to wipe the evidence of his rule from history. I'm not exaggerating, listen to some of this stuff. He once marched his armies to the English Channel, but upon reaching it, ordered his men to collect seashells from the beach. He would regularly dress as a woman in the palace like some kind of ancient Roman Maxwell Klinger. He announced that he was a god and commanded a path be built from his palace to the temple of Jupiter so that he could chat with the other gods, cutting the heads off statues and replacing them with busts of his own. Not to mention the incest with his sisters and cruel punishments he later exacted on his citizens. So what made Caligula so crazy? We don't know, but there are a few possible explanations. It may have been a disease that couldn't be diagnosed at the time, but the answer could lie in his childhood. For starters, Caligula isn't his real name. It's Gaius. When he travelled with his father, he would wear a tiny soldier's uniform, and so the other soldiers would call him Caligula, meaning little boots. That kind of nickname being used all the time could certainly play on your ego. His father and brothers were killed by the previous emperor, Tiberius, and he was eventually forced to act as Tiberius's adopted son, pretending all the while not to harbour resentment for him. He distracted himself by watching tortures and public executions, grooming his psychopathic side. Upon Tiberius's death, he became emperor and was initially well received by the common folk, as he repealed unfair taxes and freed unjustly sentenced prisoners. But he soon became sick, presumed poisoned, and took some time to recover, after which he became the mad ruler we remember today. In 41 AD, he was assassinated by the Praetorian Guards, stabbed 30 times, thus ending his reign. Number 8. This last entry covers the Kim dynasty, the three leaders of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un, who together have ruled North Korea since 1948. The dictatorship held by the Kims feels so unnatural in the 21st century that it's jarring for people in most countries to hear about. North Korea, more properly called the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, was created following World War II, when Japanese occupation of the Korean peninsula was ended. South Korea was under the control of the US, whilst North Korea was occupied by the Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung was a guerrilla fighter with the Soviet army during World War II, and was appointed head of the Provisional Government of North Korea in 1948. What followed was a series of steps to isolate North Korea entirely from the world, institute a system for leadership not dissimilar to the royal family, and create a new national philosophy that would further strengthen the Kim's rule in North Korea. Kim Il-sung instigated war with South Korea in hopes of reunifying the Korean peninsula. This war resulted in massive loss of life and an eventual stalemate, creating the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, between North and South Korea. Kim Il-sung's 46-year role as eternal president earned him the love and adoration of his people, and he created a true cult of personality. But this love blinded the North Korean people to the actual state of affairs. Kim Il-sung relied heavily on Soviet aid, and as the Soviet Union fell, North Korea's stagnated economy fell with it. When Kim Il-sung died in 1994 and his son Kim Jong-il took power, the country descended into a terrible famine. Between 240,000 and 420,000 Korean citizens died in this time. The same isolation that had allowed the Kims to create an illusion of godliness had also cut them off from the rest of the world, and their lack of self-sufficiency caused the famine. When Kim Jong-il had finally received enough food to save his people, he then stubbornly requested that food stop being sent in 2002, as though to save his pride. I hardly need to cover the nuclear developments from that point onward, but needless to say the Kims did a great job creating one of the most outlandish modern countries. I guess I have no right to comment on how hard it is to lead an entire country or empire, but it seems like most of the problems on this list were caused by paranoia, leaders trying to maintain their power and, in doing so, committing unspeakable acts. As they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. See you all next week. If you enjoy what we do here at CultureCrash, please consider supporting the show via our Patreon, where we have a bunch of awesome rewards, or by checking out our online store. All links are in the description below.